Ford gets taken out of the picture. IH has their Farmall tractor out, which was kind of the revolutionary tractor that could replace the horse.
It's amazing that tractor companies continued to release new products.
So Deere went back to the drawing board and wanted to develop a true row crop tractor, which the Model A was.
Funding for Tractor Wars 2 was provided by Friends, the Iowa PBS Foundation, as well as generations of families and friends who feel passionate about the programs they watch on Iowa PBS.
By 1929, the farm tractor had evolved from huge lumbering machines to smaller, nimble units that could both plow fields and cultivate row crops. Tractors were steadily replacing horses as the source of power on farms. Millions of farmers were ready for their first tractor.
State of the tractor business was optimistic. The Deere Board of Directors got together in October of 1929 and talked about all the good times ahead. They were expecting record sales and record profits. They didn't know what was coming actually 2 days later.
2 days after the John Deere board meeting, the nation's mood changed. The New York Stock Exchange had been gyrating for weeks. The Dow Jones average had lost 10% of its value since its August highs. On Thursday, October 24th, the Dow dropped 13%, and over the next 3 weeks, the index shed half its value. A crisis that began in finance moved to manufacturing and then spread to the rest of the economy. The sudden drop in manufacturing and exports spurred a free fall of commodity prices. American agriculture was on the edge of collapse.
Farm families are in the midst of an ongoing economic depression that actually began before the stock market crash of 1929. And they have invested heavily, especially the Corn Belt. It's the most highly mortgaged region of agriculture in the nation. So it's a fairly precarious time in 1930. They've also been transferring their power and energy sources away from horses or draft animals and towards tractors. You can't say they're on every farm by 1930, but a significant number of farmers have a tractor and a horse. And that tractor business is pretty established. There's models for wheat farmers, and there's models for row crop farmers, and there's the general purpose tractors too.
A year later, in the fall of 1930, the bank failures began. Over the next 2 years, more than 5,000 banks, about 15% of the nation's total institutions, would fail. Households, both wealthy and poor, found themselves destitute. By January of 1933, U.S. incomes had dropped by more than half. Unemployment would exceed 24%. The move to tractors, which had improved efficiency on many farms, compounded the problem. Farm production increased as demand dropped, crushing prices. The farm implement industry was forced to shrink.
There were 160 manufacturers in 1924, 1925. By 1930, there were about 8 full-line equipment manufacturers that were left. So there was a lot of mergers, acquisitions, consolidations. International Harvester was still the leader by far after Henry Ford's departure. John Deere was a distant number 2, especially in the tractor business.
Despite difficult financial conditions, 30% of farms in the Corn Belt owned tractors in 1930. Tractors were even more valuable in North and South Dakota, where they were responsible for powering 40% of operations. Timely planting and harvest mattered more for wheat than other row crops. International Harvester saw the largest growth in tractor sales, and by 1929, the Farmall commanded 60% of the tractor market.
IH has their Farmall tractor out, which was kind of the revolutionary tractor that could replace the horse. So International Harvester itself is sort of hit their stride, and they did slow sales, but they doubled down on development. And this was one of the smartest things they did in history. If they had continued to do it, it would be a very different world today.
John Deere executives and engineers believed that the ability to cultivate row crops was the missing piece to tractor success.
And they developed this Model GP, and they went down a lot of wrong roads, which isn't unexpected. Management so badly wanted to answer the farmall and get in on some of those big sales that they pushed them to get it out too quickly, and it just wasn't ready.
The GP was underpowered for its weight and was plagued by design issues. Only 30,000 GPs were sold over 8 years, when Harvester was selling that many farmalls every year. The tractor industry was terrified of Harvester.
Harvester had such a fiscal advantage. It was literally like 10 to 1 at that time in terms of dollar for dollar what they were making. So these companies, to survive, had to be very, very careful.
But the horse was still the primary source of power on American farms.
There were about 25 million horses and mules on farms and still in cities in 1920. And by 1930, there's about 13.5 million. So that's a significant drop in the numbers of horses and mules, directly attributable to increased use of tractors. But what does that really mean? So for every horse that you take out of your stable, you could put about 2.5 acres into some other product, row crops for market sale, row crops for livestock feed. So you combine that change during the 20s with the economic collapse and the continuing price collapse for agricultural commodities. Getting rid of the horses and investing in tractors increased production, and the consequence was overproduction and market collapse.
Between 1929 and 1932, commodity prices dropped 32%, while gross farm income was cut in half. Rural Americans were encouraged to become more self-sufficient by canning vegetables, butchering and preserving meats, raising chickens, or milking dairy cows. Much of the self-sufficiency placed a heavy burden on women, as additional food production was viewed as an extension of housework. Some believed allowing price drops was good for an economy, but the deflationary spiral pulled both prices and wages downward, accelerating the fall of both.
We're getting closer and closer to the interjection of the federal government into the farm economy. It's just on the precipice of doing this with the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1929. And this is really sort of the first time in American history where the federal government has sort of a farm policy. And that is, Hoover really didn't believe the federal government should interject itself into the agricultural economy in terms of production reductions or paying farmers to do certain things.
Despite the economic troubles, some farmers were able to buy tractors, but at a slower rate than during the 1920s. The number of tractors working American farms grew from 246,000 in 1920 to 920,000 in 1930. However, sales at John Deere collapsed, dropping 86% between 1930 and 1932.
Deere laid off at one point probably 80 to 90% of their employees during the Depression. They stopped calling in loans. They went to their dealers and said, do not collect from customers, and they extended terms. In the 1970s and 80s, Deere customers were saying, you carried my grandparents through the Great Depression, and that's why I buy Deere.
Farmers ignored President Hoover's Grow Less, Get More campaign, as voluntary reductions were for the other guy. Planted acres increased. For the only time in the nation's history, the decades-long migration from rural areas to cities reversed. Life on the farm meant having work to do and food to eat. But a farm that was profitable when a bushel of wheat was $1 was not profitable when a bushel of wheat fell to 40 cents. Eventually, unpaid debts brought foreclosure. A bank in trouble would recall all of its loans, good and bad, in a last-ditch effort to remain solvent. Hundreds of failed rural banks forced hundreds of thousands of farm foreclosures. Of the 6 million farms in the U.S. in 1930, 750,000 were shuttered or foreclosed between 1929 and 1933. The desperate times sparked desperate actions. The Farmers Holiday Association discouraged farmers from bringing their products to market in 1932. Centered in Iowa, a hotbed of agricultural activism, roadblocks were set up to block agricultural traffic. The National Guard was called out to clear roads and keep commodities moving to market. Some farmers abandoned their tractors and returned to horses, as worthless grain was cheap fuel for animal power.
It's a time really of philosophical disagreement about how you go about in dealing with the farm problem.
When Franklin Delano Roosevelt was inaugurated in March of 1933, farmers were facing the lowest commodity prices in 40 years.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Days later, Roosevelt signed the Emergency Banking Act, which insured bank deposits. The next day, half of the cash in America, hoarded by a panicked public, was redeposited in the country's banks. Deposit insurance eliminated banking panics, and the financial system found some stability.
The Roosevelt administration takes the approach that farmers can't save themselves. Cooperatives can't save the American farmer. There's got to be the expertise and financial support in some context that will help farm families, but nobody still is quite sure what that meant. So during the 1930s, you're going to see a number of farm policy programs that are contradictory, that are expensive, that are trial and error, some of which sort of work, and some of which clearly don't. But in the first 100 days, we have the Agricultural Adjustment Act approved, which is clearly an attempt to reduce production and increase prices.
Secretary of Agriculture Henry A. Wallace believed a drop in production would boost commodity prices. The Agricultural Adjustment Act allowed farmers to be paid the difference between the government's target price and the actual market price. Like the Commodity Credit Corporation, the AAA was meant to be temporary, but it essentially became permanent.
And the advantage of this was it would do a couple of things. It would interject money into the farm economy immediately. You're just paying farmers to do something with the hope that the production reduction then is going to pay off a little bit later down the line. But if you pay farmers to do something, what are they going to do? They're going to spend it on their mortgage, they're going to buy groceries. It'll have this multiplier effect.
Payments for farm production targets became considerable insurance, which helped provide a modest income for farmers.
And this marks a very important part in American agricultural history because it's really the first time in which the federal government has interjected itself into the agricultural economy. And farmers accepted it. And once this happens, the federal government never leaves. It also means that, and many farmers will not like to hear this today, but it's true, and that is, once you become dependent upon the federal government for payments of programs of various sorts, you're dependent on the federal government. You've lost the freedom of action that the American farmer never had before. So essentially, I think you can argue very clearly, from 1933 with the passage of the Agricultural Adjustment Act to the farm policy in the early 21st century, the vestiges are there that have made the American farmer dependent upon the federal government.
In the South, sharecroppers didn't receive support, and many were evicted when landowners took advantage of government programs and reduced their planted acres.
The tractors displacing horses and allowing more arable land to be put into crop or livestock feed for marketable livestock, that also moves laborers, hired men and family laborers off the farm. And where do you go? You go to earn a steady wage at an industry, maybe small town, maybe large city, but you've got that increased press of laborers needing jobs and jobs just not to be had.
Many farmers took their government checks and bought tractors. The New Deal farm programs improved the finances of America's farmers, but they also raised prices for consumers, which made the policies unpopular. Farming remained a mostly unprofitable enterprise through the rest of the decade. While tractors improved efficiency and allowed more acres to be farmed, they came at a high price.
What's not fully done yet, though, is the power of the horse. And because what's really needed at that point in time, in order for the tractor to be essential to really work on every farm, is it has to replicate everything that a horse does. So it can not just pull, it needs to do reaping, it needs to do cultivating.
Competition and consolidation had shrunk the farm implement business. By 1930, just 7 long-line companies remained. Tractor development continued despite drops in sales.
So Deere went back to the drawing board and wanted to develop a true row crop tractor, which the Model A was.
In 1934, John Deere introduced their 23-horsepower Model A. Over the next 18 years, Deere would sell 293,000 copies.
It had a PTO for driving implements, and the rear axle was configurable. So whether you're planting corn or cotton or potatoes, you had this adjustable rear axle that really set it apart from anything else that Deere had on the market. So it was wildly popular. It's going to stay in the product lineup, both the A and the B, till the early 50s. And the A is going to become the best-selling single-model John Deere tractor of all time.
The use of horses on American farms would peak in 1919 at 26 million. But a 1,000-pound horse consumes 10 pounds of grain and 10 pounds of hay each day, working or not. Tractors were attractive tools.
Many farmers they're not stick in the muds, they're progressive, and they can see the advantages of this. And they take a gamble that if I buy this size tractor, I can handle this acreage, plowing, planting, cultivating, and I can probably make my payments. And other farmers would just like to have a tractor because it's nice to have a tractor.
The transition from draft animals to tractors would eventually move 85 million acres from raising crops for feeding into growing crops for market. Loans provided by the Rural Electrification Act to rural co-ops helped deliver electrical service to farms. Electricity on farms led to indoor plumbing, electric stoves, refrigerators, and pumps.
People talk about a history-making day, and they use the term, the day the lights came on. It made all the difference in the world.
The Domestic Allotment and Agricultural Act of 1936 began sourcing revenue for farmers from all taxpayers. The American public as a whole would financially support its farmers. But when asked to reduce acres, farmers let their worst land lie fallow and farmed their best acres more intensively. Tractors allowed a crop to be planted and harvested in less time. Despite grinding through low prices and drought, farmers often bought tractors to increase production and improve efficiency on the farm. Tractor manufacturers responded by moving to 4- and 6-cylinder engines, which delivered more power. But 4- and 6-cylinder engines required expensive gasoline. 2-cylinder Deere engines that could operate on kerosene were still cheaper to run. Many farmers waited for horse-drawn equipment to wear out to justify the switch to tractors. One horse could only plow 1 acre per day due to fatigue, while a 6-horse team could plow 6 acres in 10 hours. The cost per acre of horse work versus tractor work were similar. but tractors were often twice or 3 times as fast as horses, resulting in many more acres worked in a day. The rapid adoption of the tractor as power on the farm meant most steam engines were retired by 1940, and the rest became more valuable for scrap during World War II. Tractors and electricity improved both the material and economic life on the farm. Government support of farmers helped keep the balance sheets of tractor manufacturers in the black. IH averaged a 9% profit margin annually in the farm division during the 1930s, even as overall sales dropped. John Deere managed an 18% annual profit as its models rolled off the line. International Harvester responded to competition by building the Farmall F20 and F30, which provided more horsepower than the Farmall Regular that had been dominating the tractor market since 1924. Inventors continued to tinker with new technologies. Hessel Rorda of Spencer, Iowa, put low-pressure tires on the Farmall in 1929 and found they worked in all conditions while using less fuel. Alice Chalmers made tires an option on the Model U in 1933, and the rest of the industry followed. Grain threshing equipment company J.I. Case introduced their first row crop tractors, the Model C and CC, in 1929. The CC was designed to compete with the Farmall Regular and became known for its durability. The 1935 Case RC was aimed at small farms that were still using horses. It was marketed as able to do the work of 4 to 5 large animals. Alice Chalmers introduced its all-crop tractor in 1930. The introduction of its all-crop harvester, which was aimed at farms of less than 100 acres, gave farmers their first look at combines.
One of the fascinating questions in farming in that 20s, teens, even into the 30s, when does it make fiscal sense to switch to a tractor? One of the wonderful quotes I saw about this was that horsepower is elastic and tractor power is fixed. And what that means is horses wear out, they tire, you have to feed them. And there was an incredible number of studies done at the time to see when, what size, when does it make sense to go to a tractor. It's a very complex question.
After the production of the Fordson ceased in 1930, International Harvesters sold half of the new tractors in America. John Deere followed with 20% of sales. Mergers were a constant presence in the tractor business. The Hart-Parr Company moved to Charles City, Iowa in 1901 and developed one of the first gasoline-powered tractors. Hart-Parr merged with Oliver Chilled Plow and 2 other companies in 1929 to form the Oliver Farm Equipment Company. While farm income remained flat through the Depression, the average farm size grew from 157 acres to 175 acres. Larger farms required mechanization. Manufacturers would have to adapt to new demands from farmers.
Like the Depression, Deere always had this mentality that no matter what, you have to survive. And they would use that word specifically and say, as an organization, as an operation, we have to figure out a way to survive. One of the ways they did that was they would make decisions before other companies did. And sometimes that meant maybe laying off the workforce, but figuring out a way to kind of keep them nearby because you knew business was going to pick up again. There was a lot of R&D. So the little bit of money that was to be had went into R&D, and Deere was fortunate because they did have a cash surplus. And that was a lesson learned during the ag recession of the early 1920s, which we're going to put away cash reserves. We're in a cyclical market. We understand that. So when this time comes, we're going to be prepared to survive. And in 1937, Deere goes from somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 million in sales in like 1933 to $100 million in sales in 1937, their centennial year. So they're back in a big way. They've got a product lineup that is really going to take them really through the 1950s.
During the Depression, tractors began to take their cues from autos and other consumer goods. acknowledging that the appearance of a product